Well, thank you everybody for tuning in for our conversation with Dr. Temple Grandin. Today's conversation will really focus on, what parents can be doing today, particularly with the scenario of COVID unfolding, and just tapping into Dr. Grandin's life experience at a real practical level. So,
Okay,
welcome. Thank
it's
you,
good to
Dr.
be here.
Moss. Yeah, it's good to see you again.
Okay,
Um, I just wanted to start out by saying, today with so many parents being at home with their kids, I think one of the biggest challenges must be the change to routine and how hard that is for some of our kids. What kind of advice would you give parents in trying to create new routines for their children who
well,
may
we're,
find
we're now going back to school, and so we need to create a new routine. I found that when COVID first started, what helped me was to get up in the morning, get dressed for work, showered by 8 o'clock in the morning. Try to do some of my writing and the work where I have to concentrate in the morning, but make a new routine. I also just looked up life on the International Space Station, where people have to live together in really crowded conditions. And they do a schedule. And then they have a midday meal where everybody gets together. And then they also have scheduled free time where they're not together. That's something that NASA and other people that run places where people are confined, like Arctic stations, is something that people have learned. Because when the space stations first started years ago, they had problems, squabbles, turning off mission control, um, and that the first mistake they made is they overworked them.
oh dear.
And but you have people that have to get along in a confined space, for a long period of time. I Now one of the things I would do in going back to school, I know this will get played when they're already back in school, but what's really important in autism is to reduce the surprise factor. You don't want the child getting to school and then find out they're going to have to sit and eat lunch at their desk. That's something they need to know before they go to school. No surprises. Reduce that surprise factor.
Okay. What do you think of visual calendars? Many kids are going to school part of the time and they may have to school at home part of the time. So, did you use visual calendars as you were growing up to help you understand what routines were coming up?
Well, I like a calendar and I still use this now. You can go online and it's a printable calendar. So you've got a calendar the size of just a regular ordinary piece of printer paper, and you've got a month on each calendar. I like
Mhm.
those kind of calendars. And I was just talking to someone this morning that has a combination of hybrid and in-person classes. And I suggested getting those calendars. They're free. You can print them out online, and then writing down which day is hybrid, which day is in person, when term papers are due. I've always used those. I actually hate a calendar book where it's a separate page for each day. I like being able to see the whole month. And I found back in the days when there was air travel, all of my airline travel has been canceled since March 12th. But then I could look at that calendar and go, if I fly east, I have to have an entire day for travel. Going west, I can take a late afternoon flight that
Mhm.
same day.
Mhm. Speaking of airline travel, there was an incident that made the news with masks. I'm wondering if
I
you have an
saw
opinion on that family, and
Well,
maybe that could have gone better. What could have been done that maybe would have been helpful?
well, first of all, let's get used to a mask long before you go to the airport. Second of all, give the child choices. There's a lot of different masks. I've tried lots of different masks, and I like some of them a lot better than others. And I got one I actually thought I was not going to like it. You have to tie it up with bows, but it
Mhm.
actually was loose, and I found out I liked it. Something real tight against my mouth I don't like.
Okay.
It's not quite so tight, but there's a lot of choices now, and there's also fun ones. There's a lot of masks that have fun things on them, and give the child some choices and let them get used to wearing it before you get to the have to wear it. That's what
Okay.
I would
So
recommend.
lots of preparation.
Yeah, and give them some choice. Let them have some choices of masks.
Hmm. Okay. How do you think it will play out in the classroom with social distancing? Do you think that will actually? I was kind of thinking how that would have helped my daughter in school. Part of the problem for her was everything was jostling and people were bumping
Yeah,
into each other. I'm kind of wondering if the
they,
social
they
distancing
may
will
do
actually
just fine. Terms of like on our campus, they COVID tested every student coming that was going to be on campus, and they put a few in the quarantine dorm. There was some infected, but it's very, very low. But there were some infected, and they're going to quarantine them for 2 weeks. And then the big classes are entirely online. My class has 80 students. It's entirely online. And then my graduate students are going to some small classes, under 20 students, big auditorium, space them all apart. That's what they're doing. And hopefully we can keep our university open, because there's others where there were fraternity parties and they instantly got closed.
okay. All right. So I wanted to go back to maybe some other things that would be helpful for our families. One of the things that has always struck me about your story is, you know, at the time you were diagnosed, there weren't a lot of treatments around, and your mom had to kind of figure out ways to help you and engage you. So, what advice would you give parents who maybe can't go to different treatment programs they were
I,
accessing?
I was very lucky that my mother took me to a neurologist, not a psychiatrist, a neurologist. In fact, a very well-known neurologist. And he knew a lady, two older teachers, that taught a little speech therapy program in the basement of their house. And they had about 6 kids in the class. There was maybe 2 Down syndrome kids in that class. And the speech teacher would spend time with each child doing one-on-one speech therapy. And then there was a lot of emphasis on learning how to wait and take turns at games. That was just pounded into me. And those teachers did the same things that are done today. I mean, there's certain ABA programs that do similar things. What I have seen is good teachers, when they work one-to-one, do the same things regardless of the name of the program. Good teachers just know how to engage these kids, get the speech started, and get the turn taking started. And I'd recommend speak slowly, because when the grown-ups talked fast, it went to gibberish. My teacher would enunciate the hard consonant sounds. Also, give the child time to respond. They're like a phone with only 1 bar of service. You've got to give it time to download the web page.
Oh, that's such a nice way of putting it. Are there games that did you have favorite games? What games helped you the most when you were in that phase?
Well, when I was a young child, there weren't very many board games, so they had to take easy grown-up games. And the game that was used was Parcheesi, where you shake a little cup with dice and you toss them out, and there's little pieces that you move, and you have to take turns shaking the cup. It was a really good game for teaching turn taking. And then a little bit older, it was card games. But
Right.
there's learning how to take turns. You might have a little kid lining up blocks. Well, then let's take turns lining up the blocks.
Mhm.
That method started in an old book called The Hidden Child. What I've been seeing after I've been in this now for 40 years almost, um, people kind of reinventing the wheel. They call it other things. But a good teacher knows just how hard to push. Some kids can push, you can push harder. My teacher used to grab my chin. That worked for me. But I want to warn you, there's other individuals, you will drive them into sensory overload if you do that. This is where the good teacher has to kind of tailor how much they push by the child. You got to stretch, because if you don't push a little bit, you don't get improvement. But a good teacher has the instinct to know just how hard to push. And you get a good teacher, I want to see progress. I want to see speech. I want to see skills, dressing, potty, showering, your regular skills.
Did you have to learn to cook? That was something we taught our kiddos. That was a practical life skill. Cooking, cleaning the
Yes,
house, just
yes.
everyday practical skills that are going to help them as they leave home.
Now, I was now little child, I wasn't taught that, but yes, this is a 50s upbringing. I was raised in the 50s. All children took cooking, sewing, woodworking, all of the hands-on classes. And one of the worst things the schools have done is taking out the hands-on classes. Because I've worked in construction for 25 years with all the major meat companies. And at every single one of the companies, I noticed a pattern of how things were done. There were a lot of people with autism, undiagnosed autism, dyslexia, ADHD, that did a lot of welding, a lot of machinery design, building very clever equipment. And the degreed engineers in the university, they do the math stuff that us visual thinkers don't understand, the boilers and the refrigeration. But now we've got a huge shortage of these skilled trades. And you've got kids growing up today that never even get a chance to try tools to find out if they like them.
It's a good point. One of the things we did with Rachel was put her in the technical school within our high school. And I don't know how many parents have access to that, but it taught skills like you could learn how to be a car mechanic, a nail artist.
Right. And there's a shortage of car mechanics right now, a big shortage, and electricians, and a lot of these trades.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm wondering, in the sense of a parent who may not have access to where they're at home and they don't have access to a lot of treatment options, can you give some everyday advice? I'm hearing you say things like, you need to have a routine, get up in the morning. So I have a set routine of the day, is what I hear you saying, right? And
okay, now where you have the most difficult time is little kids, because you can't do therapy with a 3-year-old over a television, over a computer monitor. That's not going to work. You've got to coach the parents how to do it. But this is a good time to introduce a lot of practical skill learning, cooking, sewing, laundry. All of these things you can do these things. Maybe a good time to introduce tools, gardening. Gardening has just skyrocketed during COVID. Home improvement has skyrocketed because people need things to do.
Yes, I agree. A lot of home improvement. I think Home Depot used to have a kids clinic. I'm wondering if they have little kits for kids to take home.
Well, they have videos. In fact, they have a video at Home Depot on how to use a tape measure. And when Home Depot first made that video, they were afraid it would insult people. Turned out people loved it. Because I had a student in my class last year where they have to design a cattle handling facility and use a scale ruler. And I had several students who had never used a ruler to measure anything. We've got individuals, yes, college, individuals growing up totally removed from the world of the practical. And I think that's a big problem, a really big problem.
Do you think there's a role for video games, for example? Video games were a concern for us. We didn't want our kids playing them too much. So we had set times and they had to involve movement. What would you recommend?
I would recommend limiting video games. But now you've got social isolation, and there are games like Fortnite where they can talk to their friends. And that can be a social outlet. They've just come out with a new version of Fortnite. I would allow that, but I'm going to limit it. I don't want them doing it 6 hours a day. It's got to be limited, because I'm seeing too many kids get addicted to video games, and that's all they do. And they're not learning programming. There's kind of 3 kinds of kids. You've got your visual thinking kids like me, and the HBO movie shows that really nicely. We're going to be the artists, the designers, but also the car mechanics and the people that build really clever machines. I call it the clever engineering department. Then we have our mathematical kids. They'll go into traditional engineering, computer programming, physics, and these kids think more in patterns. And then you got the word kids. And autistic kids tend to be good at one thing, bad at something else. And we need to build up the skill where they are good. And I've been in situations where the parents were computer programmers, and they never thought to teach their child computer programming. They're not going to learn it unless somebody exposes them to it. Now, you've got to expose them to it. I think there's a tendency to get so hung up on the label, they don't think to expose their kid to computer programming. And then I go out to Silicon Valley. I've been to many of the major tech companies. Half those programmers are on the spectrum. And they tend to avoid the labels. And Silicon Valley parents limit technology. They know how addictive it is.
Well, I know for my daughter, we had to slow things down. She went to a community college. It was a little bit more friendly, but she is finishing her degree in web design. But
Okay,
she
good.
couldn't courses along with her regular courses. It was too much input. So it's something that she's taken on slowly. What do you see with kids on the spectrum in terms of should parents expect that maybe things are going to move a little bit more slowly
Yes,
um,
yes.
so that there's more understanding? And how do you feel about university campus versus, say, a community college campus?
I think for a lot of students, it's a good idea to take your first 2 years at the community college. I went to a small college where all my classes were like under 30 students for the um, whole entire time. And I didn't realize how lucky I was until I went to do my master's at Arizona State University. And I watched students line up for 500 student English classes. And I went, I am so glad I did not have to do that. And so a lot of students, I would take that first 2 years at the community college, smaller classes, make sure the credits will transfer, and then because the more advanced classes at the big university are smaller, but avoiding some of these huge math classes, huge English classes. Now, for me, as a visual thinker, I could not do algebra. And I'm seeing that keeping kids out of auto mechanics, and that's ridiculous. And I've worked with a lot of brilliant visual thinkers that build things. None of them can do algebra. I've asked them flat out.
So I've heard you talk about the back door,
Yeah.
how in those situations you might have to use a back door. So for people who haven't ever heard you talk about the back door before, with algebra in mind, what might a back door look like today to get around that so people who can be car mechanics can be car mechanics?
Well, if you get them exposed to car mechanics and they can learn how to do it. I talked to one mom where they got her child off of the video games, and somebody started teaching him car mechanics, and he found out that cars were more interested in video games, and he's now fixing rail cars for the railroad. You see, exposure is just so important. The way I started on my cattle work is I showed people pictures of drawings, photographs of my jobs, and when I showed my work, web design would be the same thing. Put up demo websites, have them on your phone to show to people, and show off your work. And you're good at doing web design, you'll get jobs, especially if you go beyond the sort of cut and paste website templates. You've got to get better than that. But make yourself really good at what you do. So an interview for me was show off the drawings and show off the pictures. There's a scene in the movie that's very important where I walk up to the editor of the magazine and I get his card because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would open a lot of doors. And I started writing for the magazine. Have the guts to go up and get the card. And then a week later, I had produced the article. And then I volunteered to write a column every month. Then 6 months later, they started paying me a little bit for the column. That was strictly backdoor. And half of all good jobs are gotten through just connections, gotten totally just through connections. They're not gotten front door. And get creative about just using your contacts to find the back door. They're there, but people don't see them. They're too worried about the front door. There's a wide open back door in many, many fields. I've seen people in the meat industry just start out with a job on the line, and 15 years later, they're in charge of building the new plant addition. I have actually seen that career path.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. Growing up, I know that you spent a lot of time with animals out on a ranch. Was it your aunt's ranch, as I recall?
Yeah.
What would you say the role of animals are in helping kids with autism? Or do they help alleviate stress? How did that work for you?
Well, actually, I was first introduced to horses at my high school when I was 14, and horses became my life. they also became a refuge away from bullying and teasing. One of the ways to get away from bullying and teasing is shared interests. Anything, art, music, chess, computer programming, theater, all kinds of things, shared interests. And for some kids, animals are really helpful. I was just on the phone with a humane society just today, and they one little autistic kid adopted a cat out of an animal shelter that nobody else could touch, and this autistic kid's best buds with this cat that nobody would adopt. So one kid responds really well to animals and another one doesn't. It's not one size fits all. What I have seen with animals is there's three kinds of kids: love them, afraid at first, then they love them, and then not appropriate. And it's usually sensory. They're afraid it's going to bark and hurt their ears. But for some kids, animals are just great.
Animals were helpful for you. I know they became your life. What was a turning point? What made you think that you wanted to work in that area?
And then I was exposed to animals. I mean, kids have to be exposed to stuff. I don't care what it is, to find out what they like and find out what they hate. And the school had horses. And then I went out to my aunt's ranch when I was 15, which brought me to the West. And I found I liked the West. And that exposed me to the beef industry. If I hadn't gone to the ranch, I wouldn't have been in the beef industry. I can't emphasize how important exposure is. Kids get fixated on one thing. Those fixations can change. And it takes exposure. And a lot of kids today are not getting exposed to enough different things to figure out what they might want to do for a career. Another thing that was very important for me was learning how to drive. And I'm seeing that as a major stumbling block. It's going to take longer. My aunt's mailbox was 3 miles away. So every day we went up to the mailbox and back. That's 36 miles a week. I did 200 miles on that dirt road before we did traffic. We need to do a much longer practice in a very, very safe places. Big parking lots would be a good place to start before you go into traffic. And this solves the problem with the multitasking. You've got to get that driving into motor memory where you don't have to think about how to steer, how to do the gas, how to do the brakes.
I think that's true for all of us.
More true for kids with autism. It's going to take longer. And I was lucky that mailbox was that far away because we had to pick the mail up every day anyway.
I have found my daughter drives, and what I thought was good for her in driving is she is visual, and so much of driving, is visual. The rules are there. The light's red.
That's right.
Stop.
Very clear rules. Very clear rules.
Yeah. Do you know a lot of people on the spectrum that drive that are?
Yes, and I know of parents that are afraid to let their kids drive. I've heard about driver's ed disasters where driver's ed pushed them into traffic way too quickly. No, I'm going to recommend 20 minutes a day until you burn up a tank of gas in a totally safe place. And then carefully go into traffic. Big parking lots, deserted office parks. Nobody's there now. They're just about deserted. You can go there after you've done the big parking lot for several weeks. Go at it more slowly.
What do you think about when you talk about exposure? You got my mind working when things go back to normal. I'm wondering, what do you think of summer camps? Would summer camps be a good way to get exposed to different different things? Did you go to summer camps? Is that something that you had any experience?
Summer camp, and it was bad summer camp, but I went and gave a talk at a camp in Kearney, Nebraska. And they were getting these kids with autism, even nonverbal kids, on boats and zip lines and all kinds of stuff. And the parents just couldn't believe, you got my kid on a boat? They got him on a boat and they loved it. And we need to get them out doing more things. And let them watch it first so it's not a surprise. And the kids found out they liked boats.
Right.
And this camp had the attitude, we're going to get you to do things. We're not going to force you to do anything, but we're going to expose you to a lot of stuff. And a lot of parents are too afraid to let go. I'm seeing too many kids that aren't learning shopping, laundry, and basic basic things. The mom can't let go and let her 16-year-old honor student go shopping by himself. No, I think that's
Yeah.
a big problem.
What about bus schedules? I know that Rachel got help with an aide. They actually spent it was a goal learning how to take a bus, and now, when her car has to go into the shop, she takes the bus. It seems to me that is a good IEP skill that schools
Absolutely.
can help. Rachel learned that from her school district. They taught her how to take the public bus.
No, I think that we've got to learn these kind of skills. And when I went away to special school, every week we'd go on an expedition to do our laundry at the Coin Laundry and do shopping. We had a little bit of spending money. And those shopping trips, when I look back on them, they were an important part of my education.
Yeah, I would agree. How would you, I don't know, did you have any food sensitivities or likes and dislikes in terms of texture that you had to get over? Is there something you would recommend to parents who maybe have kids who have issues with having more diversity in their diet?
Well, some of that, some of it want to try to not get too much of that started. One of the things that can help is get them involved with food prep. And I think a kid can have 5 things they despise that we won't make them eat. For me, raw egg white. Want to make me throw up? I just got to,
What?
raw egg white. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Raw egg white. Don't make me eat that. I am going to throw up. I have a few things like that they hate. And then other things they've got to try things, but get them involved in food preparation, because I'm concerned that some of these children have such a restricted diet that they could get the old vitamin deficiency diseases like scurvy. So if a child's got a very restricted diet, I recommend the multiple vitamin to make sure that they're not getting a deficiency.
I just wanted to say sorry. My dog's up here. There's a thunderstorm here, and she's afraid. So I'm just
Okay,
calming
well,
her.
all right, well, that's fine.
So anyway, she's just a little spooked. Tell me a little bit about maybe we can go into some fun stuff. What were
Okay.
some of what are some of your favorite things to do in terms of, I know you're not married, you live alone. What are your hobbies? What do you do for fun?
Well, I liked science fiction movies. That stuff I
Oh,
like. Was a big Star Trek fan. Actually went to some Star Trek conventions. That was something that I really liked. I've been following Elon Musk, and Cheryl gave me this cool Elon Musk sign that says, "When something is important enough, you do it, even if the odds are not in your favor," by Elon Musk. And I put that up
oh,
on my wall. I'm And when Elon Musk sent the 2 astronauts up to the space station, I geeked out on the whole entire thing. I totally geeked out on the fact that a costume designer designed the spacesuits. Then the engineers had to make them work. Usually that's not how it's done. But he doesn't want stuff to look ugly. Um, that kind of stuff I really like. I mean, I've been following a lot. I've always been a NASA fan. And, you know, when he shot off those astronauts, it had to be Pad 39A, the original launch pad for the moon trip. 39A is the only launch pad that's really cool. Had to be on that one. I can relate to that. I've been to NASA. I've been in the control room. I've been in the vehicle assembly building. I got to watch a SpaceX launch. That was a total vacation 3 years ago, going to NASA.
I grew up doing the Apollo missions, and I love NASA. Who's your favorite Star Trek character? Because I'm a Trekker, just out of curiosity.
Mr. Spock. Mr.
Oh,
Spock for classic Trek and Data for Next Generation. I
oh,
really
dear.
related to his logic. Those were my favorite characters. And he
Well, Data
also,
was trying to be human. What did you think of that?
well, and then one time they gave Data some emotions and he got scared and he found out he didn't like emotions that much.
What's your favorite episode in Star Trek? And is it a
Well,
classic
I remember
episode?
one where Data dates a girl and he was commenting how nice her epidermis looked, and that did not go over very well. But you see, that's logical. It's
Uh-huh.
logical, not social. Now, one of the things I've been kind of following is I think a brain can be more thinking or a brain can be more emotional. And there's a certain amount of variation between a very emotional brain and a more thinking brain. At what point do you put a label on it? And I found this very interesting article called Solitary Mammals as a Model for Autism. Now, certain animals are really social. Cattle are really social. Lions are really social. But then you take bears, and okay, let's go back to the cat family. Lions are social. Tigers and leopards are solitary. And so if tigers and leopards were people, they'd probably be labeled autistic. Are tigers and leopards abnormal? You see, there's a lot of variation. Now, obviously, somebody that has no speech, autism is a very big continuum. Yes, there is a point where there's a definite disability. But I don't think we'd have this technology that we're talking on right now without some autistic characteristics, because the social people aren't going to want to take the time to figure out how to make video conferencing work. They'd rather be social.
Right.
So
right.
There's also another interesting paper called Genomic Trade-Offs: Are Autism and Schizophrenia the Steep Price for a Human Brain? The same genetic code, and it's code involved with brain development. Lots of little tiny genetic variations, hundreds of them, that can either make you autistic, which is overdevelopment of certain brain circuits, especially in the back of the brain. Schizophrenia, you have a skimpy network. Doesn't develop enough, and then in adolescence, the network fails. They're opposite conditions involving brain development genes. Making a big brain is a messy thing, because during the fetal development, they have the brain has to grow a lot of stem cells. Boom, just grow them really fast, and things can get wired differently.
Now, it was funny, you were talking about animals and how big cats are solitary and other animals are social. I remember reading in one of your books, didn't you identify more with a cow? You said something about a cow seemed to have more of an autistic brain. Did I get that right?
Well, a cow gets scared really easily. A cow is a prey species animal, so cattle and horses are animals that get scared oftentimes more quickly than dogs. Now, when I was a child, we never had dogs that were afraid of thunder. I'm just wondering, we're keeping them more inside, whether some of that's lack of exposure. Because thunder phobias in the 50s, all the dogs were running around loose outside, they just didn't have them.
Mm-hmm. And yet vets today will tell you during New Year's, make sure your dogs are inside because they'll, it's too scary.
Yes, and during 4th of July too. Because I know somebody had a dog that ran out of the house and took off like 3 miles down the road and was hiding in somebody's garage. And it was during the 4th of July.
Yeah. I wonder, for our kids who are overly sensitive too, I imagine loud noises like that could be really bothersome. I know we turn music on for our animals. I'm wondering, was music a soother for you? Did noises bother you, and how did you get through that?
Yeah, and there's been some good success with getting a child used to things like a vacuum cleaner, a hair dryer, maybe a car horn, by letting the kid control it. Where the child turns the vacuum cleaner on and off. They control the hair dryer. They control the vacuum cleaner. They go out in the car and they beep the horn. And when they control it, they can sometimes get to tolerate it better because it reduces the startle response. There's been some really good success with doing that, where you might have a child that goes from hating a vacuum cleaner to actually liking it when they started controlling it. This element of control is important. Now, obviously, I can't control a dog barking, and with some children where the therapy animal is not appropriate, you can get barking dogs on YouTube, and you can turn them on and off. Again, control.
Yeah.
Another therapist suggested a really crazy game of kids barking like dogs and pretending they were dogs and then videotaping it and barking, and again, that's controlling the sound.
Now, I know I've talked to you in the past, and I remember you talking about how difficult it was for you to tell, I think it was cats and dogs apart. and that the brain can work differently. How would a parent recognize that in maybe a child that's not verbal, and how would you help?
Well, first of all, when I was a little kid, the way I recognized dogs from cats was size. Because in our neighborhood, we had Labrador Goldens, a Husky, an Airedale. They were all bigger than cats. Now, where the difficulty came was when a dachshund came into the neighborhood, same size as a cat. So then I studied the dachshund to see what features she has that's different than a cat. First, she barks. She smells like a dog, and she has the same nose shape as a dog, as a big dog would have. So that puts her in the dog category. You know, I remember going over to the neighbor's house. We were sitting in the grass. Her name was Rosie. And I was looking at Rosie trying to figure out why she wasn't a cat. You see,
Okay.
it's sensory based, not word based. You know, and then I very
Okay.
quickly got where I did not have a problem with telling them apart. You see, it's specific examples. You put
Right.
specific examples into categories. And then the more different dogs that I've seen, I can now sort them into different types of dogs. Okay, let's look at cats. You've got lions and tigers. Those are big cats. Then you have different kinds of house cats, Siamese cats, tabby cats, black cats. You've got different kinds of cats. So the more cats that I see, then I
Mm-hmm.
can put them into different categories. When I first started out as a little kid, there were like two cats in the neighborhood. There was Marmalade that was orange,
Right.
and so then I might assume all cats are orange. Well, they're not.
Yeah. Did you? So I assume the same thing happened with horses. Can you tell? Horses would be hard for me to tell apart. They all look very much the same, and yet they're all different breeds. Can you tell
All
a
the
lot of
heads
different?
can be shaped differently. Their coloration is different. You see, now I'm seeing right now some specific horses, and okay, you take Black Angus cattle. They look more the same. The Hereford cattle has a white head, and then the dairy cow has the spotted pattern, and each spotted pattern is unique. They're
Okay.
like a fingerprint. The Holstein has a black and white spotted pattern, but the Black Angus is just all solid black. Or you might have a Red Angus, you might have a Shorthorn that's solid red. Yeah, those look
Okay.
more the same.
Do you have a favorite horse or a favorite animal?
Well, I like beef cattle. I've worked with them a lot, so I like them. And this brings up the thing of getting kids exposed to different things, whether it's animals or whether it's car mechanics, or let's say a mathematically inclined kid, computer programming. Or you've got a
Right.
child in fourth grade that's good at math. Well, let's take him up to harder math. Don't make them do the baby stuff. And these math
Mhm.
kids aren't going to like the stupid way they teach math now. Get some old fashioned. An algebra book, for me, it's a doorstop. But for a math kid, I want an old fashioned algebra book out of the attic. It's just all the numbers, none of this new nonsense. Just give the kid the old algebra book with the numbers. And then you give him the geometry book or the calculus book. Um, and he may take off with it. Let the
Yeah.
10-year-old do college math if he can do it. Develop that. And the other big
Right.
thing we got to start teaching kids is work skills. Because I'm seeing a
Mhm.
lot of grandparents come up to me and they tell me that they've just discovered they have autism when the kids get diagnosed. But that grandfather has a decent job. He's an accountant or an engineer or some other kind of a job. But he learned how to work doing a paper route at age 11. And we've got to find substitutes for the childhood paper route. And really good substitutes are church and community center jobs and volunteering at the nursing home, which are now COVID's turned that all off. But they've got to learn how to do a task outside the family on a schedule. And with the real little
Mhm.
kids, it's chores. No, they're not
Right.
learning how to work is a major issue. And a fully verbal kid, they need to have two real jobs before they graduate from high school. We need to make it
Well,
happen.
if there's, we were almost at the end here, so I guess I'll ask you the question I always do. If there was one thing that you could say to parents right now to help them, what would the one thing be?
Well, it's going to vary depending upon age. If you have a 2-year-old or 3-year-old that's not talking, you've got to do something about early intervention. and there are places where there are no services. Well, of course, I like to recommend my own books. This is The Way I See It, the most basic book on autism. It was updated last year, The Way I See It. And if they're in a place with no services and you have a child with no speech, you need to start working with them now. Don't wait. One-on-one, teaching them to take turns, teaching them skills, teaching them words. That's what I'd recommend parents of real little kids. Older kids, I want to develop their strengths. They've got to learn basic social, and I want to teach them working skills. Start that young. And then now
Wonderful.
even nonverbal, some of the nonverbal can do a job. We have to start looking at what can he do? There's too much he can't do and not enough what is he capable of doing. Okay, algebra for me, that's pounding on a brick wall. Let's work on things that I am capable of doing. I have to convert information to a graphics file to remember it.
Right. So capitalize on the strengths.
That's right. And I want to emphasize, okay, if you're working with nonverbal individuals, I'm not talking about little kids here. You know, as soon as past 6 and there's no language, there's 2 really good books. One is Tito Mukapadahe, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? And then there's the sequel to The Reason I Jump by the little Japanese boy. And he describes how he was like a broken robot and couldn't control his movements. Tito describes his sensory disordered world, but he's got a good brain in there. Both of these individuals type independently. And I never can remember the proper title of that book because it's numbers. It's something like Fall Down 5 Times, Get Up 9 Times. Sequel to The Reason I Jump. Those books are must-reads if you're working with nonverbals past age 6. When I was 4, I started talking at age 4. Little kids, I want to work on getting the speech going. But these books will really give you insight. And these people are absolutely verified to type independently. There's also Carly's Voice. And Carly Fleischman's had a blog. But reading information written by nonverbal individuals that are verified to type independently. And that means nobody touching them and nobody touching the device. Okay, let's say this legal pad was a laptop or it was an alphabet board. I've seen the other person moving the board like this. Well, that's cueing. You cannot touch the device, whether it's a computer or whether it's a cardboard or the person. And these individuals are capable of doing that. And what you're finding out is they've got an active, good brain in there. Mm-hmm. In a totally dysfunctional body where they can't control movements and visual information is coming in all distorted, like a bad satellite television.
Right. Well, gosh, I think all the information that you've given is really going to be helpful to parents who are at home, that they're surrounded by things they can do to help their kids, even if life has changed right now, but there's lots that they can do.
Well, what I've been seeing happening in my neighborhood is like 3 families getting together and forming a quarantine pod. And within that quarantine pod, they don't have to socially distance. But then everybody has to be really careful not to bring COVID into that quarantine pod. And there's Facebook pages for helping to get those things organized. Because kids, especially elementary school kids, they need the social interaction with other children. That's really important.
It's very important. Well, thanks for taking the time today to talk to us. I know a lot of parents are going to find it helpful. So,
thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.